Let's talk football with our man, Joel Klatt.
He is presented each week by MyBookie.ag. That special sign-on bonus for MyBookie when you use code NEXTROUND. That is code NEXTROUND. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie.ag. What is up, Klatt? How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing today?
Doing awesome. Thanks a lot. I want to look back at the game you had, Colorado and USC, because I knew USC was going to win the game. But I wanted to watch and see if I have made too big of a deal about their defensive deficiencies.
Right.
I came away from that game thinking I have not made too big of a deal about that. It is still the same defense Lincoln Riley has had for a decade now.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up same defense, because if you actually look at their numbers, all the defenses that he's had since he's been a head coach, they are remarkably similar in terms of points per game, yards. It just doesn't change. And, there's only three things that you can evaluate as a coach. Talk to a lot of good coaches about this. When things don't go well, you have to go back and evaluate three things: personnel, coaching, or scheme. Those are the three things. And they seem to have addressed the personnel and have constantly told us that it's about the personnel. Problem with that is, at some point, you're also responsible for the personnel. And those of us that are watching understand that personnel is drastically increased in terms of its quality over the last few years, and in particular this year. Bear Alexander up front, Mason Cobb at the second level, Kalen Bullock in the back end. They have three all Pac-12 caliber, some of them maybe even All-American caliber players at every level of their defense. So the other two categories have got to be evaluated at some point. You've got to look at the scheme and you got to look at the coaching. Now, this is a team that doesn't even have to play great defense. This is what's so maddening, I think, for USC fans now, and certainly what Oklahoma fans faced when he was there, is that they're not even asking him to be dominant. We're not asking you to be the 21 Georgia Bulldogs here, right? You're asking him to just be average. See, that's the thing. Last year's three losses, they gave up an average of 45 points. 45.
Yeah.
Right? We're just asking you to, don't give up 40 points, because I'm pretty sure that regardless of who they play, they'll score 40 points. Now, let me get into maybe a little bit different angle on this one, if you don't mind, because at some point now you're going to have to look at the totality of the game philosophy from Lincoln Riley, and in particular how they run their offense in the second half. On Saturday, they had a giant lead, 41-14 with 2 minutes to go in the third quarter. They snapped the football with a running game clock in the second half 20 times, okay? The average on the play clock for those 20 snaps was 14 when they snapped it. So let's just extrapolate that out. You're up basically 27. Basically, it's over. You can run the football. You're really good at running the football. You've got Marshawn Lloyd. It's one of the worst run defenses, in particular with what they showed against Oregon from the previous week. If they just snapped the ball at an average of 4 seconds in those 20 snaps and not 14 on the play clock, that's 10 seconds a snap. That's 200 seconds of game time. That's 3 minutes and 20 seconds of game clock. That's 10 to 15 plays of the opposition that you don't have to see. That's a possession and a half. Mm-hmm. At some point, you've got to talk about game philosophy and management on the offensive side. It can't just all be about numbers. And I'm not suggesting that it is, but you've got to play to win the game and not just try to score 60. So as much as they have to fix the defense, they've got to tackle better. They got to find corners. They need to change some of their schematics. Certainly, they ran cover 2 in the red zone. Cover 2 in the red zone against a 3-by-1. You're begging them to throw the middle receiver, the number 3 release seam route, begging them. And if you don't throw the seam route, then you should be fired as an offensive coordinator. Cover 2 in the red zone. What are we doing against 3-by-1? This is just one of those things. So all of this to tell you that there is a disconnect at a lot of different levels. It's not just Alex Grinch's problem. It's not just the corners problem. It's not just the offensive philosophy, but the combination makes it a situation where 41-14 turns into 48-41 and you're recovering an onside kick.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt the defense is going to get them beat sooner or later. When you look at the Pac-12, as good as it is, Joel, is anybody good enough to go undefeated in that league?
Not undefeated. No. This is, and I know you guys will roll your eyes at this, but this is what, the SEC was a few years ago in terms of its depth, where you're just like, man, can anybody actually get through this thing? And I don't think that they can. Look at Washington. I really believe in Washington. You guys have heard me talk about Michael Penix Jr., their wide receiver core, their offensive line, and yet they're in a one-possession game at Arizona. Look at Utah, gets a big win over UCLA, and they roll up and have to play a road game on a Friday night and get pretty dominated against Oregon State. You look at USC's schedule in particular. USC showed that they weren't stopping the run like they should. A team in Colorado that could not run the football ran it for almost 5 yards a carry, and you can even take out the sack numbers, and it's certainly 5 yards a carry. They still have to face Oregon, who runs it, Notre Dame, who runs it, and Utah, who runs it. Shedeur Sanders had his way in the passing game, including an unknown, relatively, 4-star true freshman getting his first catch of his career, who ends up going 7 for 196 and a touch. They still have to face Washington. So let's just say that if USC were to get through this thing unscathed, 9 straight weeks against Power 5 opponents, some of those on the road, it would be, I would be shocked if they were able to get through this gauntlet. And quite frankly, I would be pretty surprised if anybody in the Pac-12 gets through unscathed, which, by the way, I'm going to stand on this soapbox. A one-loss Pac-12 champion absolutely should go to the playoff, without question, with what that league is this year.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, and I hope that ends up being the case. Ohio State, in my eyes, has the best, if not the second best, one or the other, wins so far this year at Notre Dame. Some will say Texas at Alabama. Some maybe Florida State, Clemson. But that was such a good win for me for Ohio State because of how they had to win the game. Here comes Ohio State after a bye week at home against Maryland. Mike Loxley's team can put up some points. Do you feel this version of Ohio State, if it becomes, a game in the 30s, can this Ohio State team keep up offensively with what they have at quarterback?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they win the knockdown dragout, which we didn't know if they could based on the last couple of years. And now the question is going to be, can you go score 38 or 42 when you absolutely have to? We'll see. I do believe that last drive for Kyle McCord is going to be an enormous confidence booster for them, their offense. There's no doubt about it. And they really only have, at this point now, when you actually watch the film and take it in its totality, they have one weakness on their offense, and that's short yardage run game. That's glaring. I'm not saying that that's nothing, but that's their one weakness. I can't wait to see this game, and I think that the stress that the defense is going to be placed under is pretty immense from that passing game from Maryland. Maryland's one of those teams. There's a few undefeateds that we just haven't talked about, haven't really looked at. I think, Missouri falls under this category. Washington State falls under this category, and certainly Maryland falls under this category. It's like, what are these teams? What do they have, and how good are they? Maryland seems to be a team that I think can really scare Ohio State, even in the shoe.
Now that is the Big Noon Kickoff, 11 o'clock on Fox Saturday. Joel Klatt with us, courtesy of mybookie.ag. Don't forget code next round when you sign up at mybookie.ag. Get that special sign-on bonus when you make your initial deposit at mybookie.ag. Code next round for that sign-on bonus. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with mybookie.ag. Great SEC rivalry this weekend in the Red River Shootout, Oklahoma and Texas, Klatt. Texas has been tested. I don't think you can deny that. I don't know that Oklahoma has. They have looked much better than they did last year. You've seen them with your own two eyes. Do you think they can hang with Texas in this game?
Oklahoma is better, but I think Texas is much better than what they have been over the last couple of years. I thought last week was a real test for them. And I know that sounds crazy because it's Kansas, but hear me out. Like, the knock against Texas, and it's one that I've made, is that they play to the level of their competition. And we've seen that over the last few years. I think that teams that are not great at the line of scrimmage find themselves in tough contests against inferior opponents because they're relying on things that are not as reliable as toughness at the line of scrimmage, the ability to run, the ability to defend. This is why, like, Alabama and Georgia don't lose to bad teams. Now, Georgia is not what they've been at the line of scrimmage, which is why they find themselves in these games that they're finding themselves in, whether it's South Carolina or Auburn. Texas has now like turned a corner where they're blowing out Baylor and then they're handling Kansas. And I think that's in large part due to the fact that they're much better and more sound and more physical at the line of scrimmage. I don't know if that's the case for Oklahoma. Their offensive line, to me, is a bit of a mystery, in particular, whether they can run the football or not. And Dylan Gabriel's ceiling as a quarterback, I don't know what it is. Now, against an inferior opponent, yeah, they can score 50. There's no doubt. Cincinnati had a decent defense, not a great defense, and they didn't do much offensively. Their superpower offensively is that they've got three guys that can really go on the outside. Jalil Farouk, Nick Anderson, Andrell Anthony. Big, tall, physical wide receivers. The problem is Dylan Gabriel's probably his worst asset is his ability to push the ball down the field. You know, so their ceiling offensively, to me, is still a bit of a mystery. I think it's probably lower than where Texas's offensive ceiling is, and I think Texas is better at the line of scrimmage. Texas is the better team, and I expect them to win the Red River Shootout. I still want to call it. They want to call it a rivalry.
No,
but
it's the
Red River
shootout. Come on, it's the shootout.
And I will. And then if that does happen and Texas does win, they then have the easiest path to the college football playoff in the country.
Yeah, they'll be favored the rest of the way. Their defensive line ate Texas did when they were in Tuscaloosa. They ate Alabama's offensive line up. Quinn Ewers ran a couple of good runs for touchdowns this past week. With what they have at running back and Brooks and Baxter and at receiver, how does Ewers being able to hurt people with their legs add a little more stress on Venable's defense?
I mean, it stresses you to no end. I mean, like that would be. I talked about this in reference to Caleb Williams on the broadcast this week. There's really 5 areas where you evaluate or you try to defend the quarterback. It's like, you start with his mind, you know, like how prepared is he going to be? How versed in the schematics is he going to be? Does he know where to go with the football at all times? Then you go to things like his arm talent, his ability to control the game from the pocket and throw on time with anticipation, his ability to create. And then lastly would be like, can he threaten you with his legs as a runner? I thought Ewers was pretty good in every other one of those categories, except for the threaten you with his legs. I didn't know what he could possibly do. So if he's now presenting that element, he becomes kind of a 5-tool quarterback, which is incredibly difficult to defend, especially when you're talking about what he has at his disposal up front on the offensive line, in the backfield, on the outside. It's tough to defend that team. Teams with average offenses do not gain 600 yards. They certainly don't do it gaining 300 on the ground and 300 through the air. That there are special offenses that do that. Now, I will throw this out there. The biggest key in the Red River Shootout this week is Texas's ability to disguise their offensive play calling. I think you know where I'm going with that. It is well documented what Clemson was great at, and now what Oklahoma is great at defensively. Holding defensive play calls, changing looks, and getting into very specific calls based on the offensive play call. That's why Ryan Day and Ohio State hammered Clemson in the playoff, is because they had a really good plan for that element of the game. And I'm interested to see how Sark handles that moving forward. And he seemed to have a really good handle on how to handle that element last year in this game.
Ole Miss had 11 penalties. They gave up 49 points and 637 yards, and they won the game. Going into the season, if you would have said, look, USC's defense is going to be bad again, I could have bought that. I couldn't buy LSU in year 2 under Brian Kelly, this defense being bad. The offense is lights out right now for LSU. What's going on with the defense?
Well, I mean, who knew that a classic 2012 Big 12 shootout would just erupt right there in Oxford?
I was going to say that next time us SEC folks start banging our chests about defense, remind them of this Holiday Bowl game.
It was a Holiday Bowl, and you're right about LSU, and I don't know what LSU is right now, and they stay in the poll, and that's a reputation ranking. Like Maryland should be ranked over over LSU. Like that's, of course, but they aren't. Why? Because one says Maryland and one says LSU, and this defense, they were lost against Florida State in that second half, and they've been lost the rest of the season, and I don't get it. I really don't. I do know that Brian thought that he was going to get more, I would say, like buy-in and continuity with the staff that he built at LSU that would have been more similar to what he had at Notre Dame, and he didn't. So he had to scrap together. I don't think that this staff is exactly what Brian would want. Trying to put that, like you guys can kind of get my drift, and that's showing up. Again, 3 areas: coaching, scheme, and personnel. I think that their personnel is probably pretty good. How do you not put Harold Perkins in a better position to succeed? An off-the-ball linebacker against Florida State and Jordan Travis? Like, what are we doing? Like, that's, it's like the Giants didn't say, like, hey, Lawrence Taylor, you know what we want you to do? Like, go cover Jerry Rice. Right. They didn't do that, right? So LSU is a weird one, and LSU right now is the fly in the ointment in college football. Their game against Florida State, and now what? And this used to be Texas A&M. This used to be the role of Texas A&M. We would overrate them, and then any win against them would get overblown the rest of the year. That's now LSU's role in this season, this version of college football. I believe that Florida State, even with some caution lights on the dashboard with what they've done against Boston College and Clemson, we're overlooking that because they've got a great resume. Well, do they? Like, should LSU be ranked? I don't think that they should.
Yeah. I find this team really interesting as we move towards another weekend of college football. Michigan. Brown and I were talking this past week about what Aiden Hutchinson is doing on the NFL level, and he made a point of the last 2 years of how Michigan's putting quality NFL defensive linemen into the league. This team just every week seems to just go out there and check a lot of good boxes, but they haven't really played anybody yet. Do you believe Michigan's number 1 in the country? Would you make Michigan your number 1 team in the country?
I did, actually.
Oh, okay.
I did make them. And the reason is, I know who they've played. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that their resume is great. Now, your job in college football is to be as dominant as possible against the schedule in front of you. I think we all agree on that.
Yes.
Now, some schedules, they're not evenly yoked, and we understand, and I understand that. Having said that, there is no chance for their opponents. It is an air of inevitability, as if you're locked in a 6x6 cage with a boa constrictor. Like, that's going to end poorly for you at some point, unless you got a giant knife, like that. And Michigan will slowly and methodically take you apart and squeeze you until you're dead. Their defense is right now the best scoring defense in the country. The way that they're built defensively is perfect for the modern style of football. They have big defensive tackles, as you were talking about, that build a run wall. They've got solid edge rushers to build a hard edge. They've got hybrid style defenders at linebacker and safety, and really good corners to lock you down. So if you're looking at this, like, they can run, they do everything well, those teams have zero chance. And then offensively, I think that they're the best offensive line in the country so far through this first month. Their quarterback has the ability to threaten you and hurt you with some speed on the outside. And there is an inevitability to their games. I'm going to see them next week. We've got to go call the Indiana game. I don't know if that's official yet. So that'll be interesting. But this This team so far has been the most dominant team in the country, albeit against a very weak schedule. But man, the question is like, okay, they play a neutral site game against who this weekend that can beat them?
Michigan?
Right.
There's nobody I would have supreme confidence in. I don't.
No.
Neutral side, I would throw Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia.
Texas
Ohio
would be,
State,
yeah, Texas
maybe.
would be. But I mean, I don't even think you have to stay in the undefeated.
Yeah, and I want to see JJ. Look, I think JJ McCarthy is really good, but just a couple of weeks ago we saw him turn it over 3 times.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
and he turned it over against TCU in the playoff game, which is what I agree. That would be the one question I have. I think that's a good point.
It's a little bit like old school. I mean, I know you don't want me to do this, but old school Alabama, like under
Sure.
Saban.
No.
They would get up.
I don't mind that at all.
They would get up 14-0, and the other team would be like, "Well, guess we need to scrap the run and start throwing." Are you sending us those hats? Is that what you're showing us?
No.
Okay.
No. These are exclusives, though.
Yeah.
You can't buy these anywhere. Do you know how you can get them, boys? You ready for this shameless plug on your show?
How's that, Klatt?
All you got to do is go subscribe to my show, the Joel Klatt Show, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. You leave a review. We're giving 5 of these away on on Wednesday. You can't get them anywhere else.
Right.
Wow.
You see me wearing them, so I just want to, you've asked me about the hats.
Yeah.
I've got 5. I'm giving them away. That's all you got to do.
Yeah. Wow. Go subscribe to the Joel Klatt Show.
Now, what does the Rose Bowl feel about you sporting that hat?
They sent it.
Okay.
It became a thing because I was wearing it on my program, and people started hitting me up on social media. And so I said, hey, like, it's up to the Rose Bowl. If they want to send me, 5 hats, then I'll give them away. And sure enough, 2 days later, they showed up.
No, and they'll be selling them.
Yeah.
So I was breaking down tape of the show. I go back and rewatch some shows. My wife walks by and says, "So is that guy a big fan of The Bachelor? Is that why he wears that hat?" And I was like, "Yes."
The Golden Bachelor.
Klatt's on the Golden
The
Bachelor.
Golden. Yeah, that's right. I'm headed in that direction. Oh, my goodness.
right.
Good to see. It's good to see you guys. Sorry I was late. I had to reboot the internet. It was a mess this morning.
It's all good. We got 3 hours. Doesn't matter to us, man. We'll see you, though, on Maryland, Ohio State, Fox 6 in Birmingham. The big noon kickoff, 11 o'clock Saturday. Klatt, enjoy that one, buddy. Thank you.
I appreciate it. See you guys.
All right, see you. Klatt, like all of our guests on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. He joins us each week, courtesy of MyBookie.ag. Code next round gets you that special sign-on bonus when you visit MyBookie.ag. Monday Night Football tonight. I'm told this guy to my left's got a play on the game at Lance'sLock.com. You can play it at MyBookie.ag. Bet anything. I'm throwing Scott out. Anything, anytime, anywhere. Scott, MyBookie.ag. Code next round. MyBookie.ag. Code next round for that special sign-on bonus.